Hello everyone, and welcome to our first Budget Builds Monthly Supercut video. Now, due to this being the first video, we're going to go into some details of what's different from our standard Budget Builds Monthly videos, and then we'll get into building out these PCs. So let's get into it. So the reason for Budget Builds Monthly Supercut is because I didn't want people to have to wait a couple of years to see what their PC request build would be like. So instead of doing once a month, I'm just going to take a handful and build out in these Supercut videos. I did specify in the first episode of this season, every third month will be a Supercut video, depending on how much requests we have to go through. But they will vary from Supercut to Supercut. Now, this being a Supercut video, I won't go into too much depth like I normally do on each Budget Builds Monthly episode. I'm actually just going to do the PC build, list out some pros and cons, maybe check out the used market, but it won't be a full in-depth build like I normally do. Whether you're new to the channel or you've seen our other Budget Builds Monthly videos before, I'm just going to outline quickly what we touch upon. Posting the first Monday of every month, I review your budget request submitted via the Google form down in the description below. Using this information and PCPartPicker, I try to build the best bang for the buck PC within your budget, considering any constraints or platform preferences you may have. We usually make 4 builds, 2 AMD and 2 Intel, using either DDR4 or DDR5. We also check for deals on Micro Center and Newegg to see if we can modify the build to create a better PC within your budget. If possible, we also take a look at the used marketplace too. Next, we compare each build using online benchmarks and list out the pros and cons of the top options. This helps us figure out which build is best for you. And don't forget, we can't do any of this without your input. Speaking of the input, let's see how we fill out the Budget Builds request form. Now, a quick disclaimer to go with this. Budget builds will be as close or slightly over the budget due to parts and availability, as well as sales going on at the recorded time. In case you forgot or you're new to the channel, this is how we fill out the Budget Builds request form. For your privacy, we do not collect your Google information. Just don't worry about that. You actually don't have to sign in. Budget builds do not include taxes, fees, or Windows keys unless specifically asked otherwise. Budgets will be in USD. Now, form factor preference, this will determine case size, as in this is the motherboard size we're going to pick. If you want a mini ITX motherboard, we will go with a mini ITX case, unless you want us to get a micro ATX motherboard and then a specific case size, just put here in other. For CPU and GPU preferences, if you want us to build an Intel only system or an AMD only system, and same thing for their graphics cards. If you have any other preferences or requests when it comes to CPU or GPU, like an Intel GPU, just put it here in the other category. Areas of focus just covers the hierarchical standpoint of how we're going to build out the system and spread that budget. If you want us to focus first on your CPU, then your motherboard, maybe your graphics card, we're just going to put the budget more focused towards those. Focus first, and then focus last. We'll just grab some generic and placeholder items for you, the user, to actually pick out later on. For already purchased or own system components, if you already have a power supply or a case or anything like storage, just put it here. Just specify specifically what you have, just so we can work that into the build and we don't have to worry about putting money towards something in that budget that you already have. No sense in buying 2 PC cases if you can just use the one you already have. For peripherals, if you are requesting any, like a mouse, a keyboard, a monitor, a headset, just press on the peripheral, and then the other just request what kind. For example, if you want a 1440p monitor, just hit monitor and then press 1440p in here. And then other request, no RGB, or anything else you want us to know, just press in the other and then hit submit. And that pretty much concludes filling out the Google form. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comment section below. Alright, with all of that out of the way, let's check out what kind of system we're building out in this month's episode. Our first response has a budget of 2000 USD, wants a gaming type of system, no form factor preference, wants an AMD CPU with no GPU preference, and for us to focus on their GPU, then their CPU, memory, storage, and then pretty much everything else. So if we already purchased our own system components, they have a 5GB M.2 SSD, 1TB hard drive, some 750W gold power supply, a GTX 1080, an i7-8700K, some mid-tower case, 32 gigs of DDR4 3000, and then some cheap air cooler, maybe it's the stock one, but either way we can always replace that if needed. And then no other requests or peripherals. So for this build, we're pretty much just going to put this parts list together and then swap it out with some AMD CPU and I guess just upgrade. For $2,000, we're pretty much building an entire new system minus the GPU, the CPU, and the cooler. We may also subtract the RAM, but I see two builds coming out of this, an AM4 build and then an AM5 build. Let's start out with this first build and see what we can get. Alright, and here's the user's current system built out. I put some placeholders in as they weren't really specific in what they had. Some of these are going to end up swapping them out, but here's what they pretty much have at the moment. So let's check out our AM4 build and go from there. So for AM4, went with the Ryzen 7 5700X 3D. It's an 8-core, 16-thread, 3 GHz boosting to 4.1. For our CPU cooler, went with the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3. Now, I don't know what kind of mid-tower case the user has, so either of these will be the same price, it's just whichever one actually fits in the user's case. For our motherboard, we have the MSI Mag B550 Tomahawk Max. This is a Wi-Fi ATX AM4 motherboard. For our memory, pretty much just kept what the user currently has. It is DDR4, so it doesn't make sense into rebuying more RAM for no reason. For storage, we pretty much kept what the user also has. And then for our graphics card, we have the XFS Speedster. It's an RX 7900 XTX. And then the case and power supply all stay the same, sitting right at that budget. Now, I'm going to say this quickly, and I'm trying to say this for most of the builds we have. Currently, for sale graphics cards make 0 cents into how much they're actually being sold for. So it's best to actually wait a little bit of time when buying your graphics card. Maybe they'll go on sale, because a 7900 XTX is not $1,400. It's actually supposed to be a lot less than that. But this is all for the user. If you build the system out, don't get the graphics card yet. Pretty much keep your current graphics card, and then when they go on sale, then upgrade. Alright, that's AM4. We were able to build an AM5 build out, so let's get into that. And then here for our AM5 build, went with the Ryzen 7 7700X. It's an 8-core, 16-thread, 4.5 GHz boosted to 5.4. We have that same CPU cooler that we saw before. This is the MSI Mag B650 Tomahawk Wi-Fi. For our memory, we went with the Corsair Vengeance. It's an RGB 64GB kit of DDR5 6000 CL30. And then everything else pretty much stays the same, except for our graphics card. Now, when I originally built this out, I went with the MSI Ventus 3X. It's the RTX 4070 Ti, because it was actually on sale. Currently, it's out of stock. Now, in its place, I put this PNY card just to get a current price. It is over the budget, but again, same thing with graphics cards. It's probably not best to build a PC out, specifically buying graphics cards at the moment. So, whenever they go back to actually being their close to MSRP price, go for this MSI Ventus. Alright, and the only thing we're going to do real quick is do a CPU comparison between our AM4 and AM5, and then we'll move on to the next build. And then to quickly touch upon, here's our Ryzen 7 7700X versus our Ryzen 7 5700X 3D. So it seems like we get a CPU mark of 10,000 score difference between the two. So it's pretty much up to the user. That's about it for now. We're going to move on to the next build, and stay tuned to the end because we might actually check out some bundled deals. Maybe we could rebuild this to be something better. For build 2, the user has a budget of $800 USD, wants a gaming type of system, wants a micro ATX motherboard, an AMD CPU, while an NVIDIA graphics card, has no areas of focus, wants the same motherboard and storage, but that's fine. No purchased or owned system components, no peripherals or other requests. Now, that doesn't seem too bad. Pretty much just building out a system. Let's see what we can do on micro ATX. All right, here we go, build 2. Here's our AM4 build out. We couldn't build an AM5, so here's the only build we could do. Went with the Ryzen 5 5600X. It's a 6-core, 12-thread, 3.7 GHz boosting to 4.6. For our motherboard, we have the MSI B550M. It's a micro ATX AM4 motherboard. For our RAM, we have the LPX 16GB kit of DDR4 3200 CL16 from Corsair. For storage, we went with the Crucial P3 Plus 500GB PCIe 4.0x4 NVMe SSD. For our graphics card, we went with an RTX 3060. It's a 12GB card. That's the one you want to get. For a case, we just picked some placeholder Cooler Master Micro ATX Mini Tower case. And then our power supply is just a 750W bronze from Corsair. Now, I would like to get a 750W gold, especially for $800, but our power usage isn't too high given the components that we have. Now, this is strictly for gaming, so even a 750W bronze is perfectly fine. Alright, and again, as I said before, there is no AM5 build. So the next thing for us to do is to go on to the next build. For build number 3, we have a budget of 1,360 USD. It's a combination working gaming system, micro ATX form factor preference, Intel CPU, no other GPU preferences, and wants us to focus first on our GPU, and then cooling and so forth. No already purchased or owned system components, wants us to get a monitor with no specifications, and has a request for RGB. This honestly doesn't seem too bad. We will be focusing a little bit on that Intel CPU, but because it's Intel, we do have a little bit more to play with rather than AMD for these working type systems. For CPU, went with the i7 13700KF. It's a 16-core, 24-thread, 3.4 GHz boosting to 5.4. For our CPU cooler, went with the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3. It's a 240mm AIO. Our motherboard is the Asus Prime B760M Micro ATX LJ1700 motherboard. For our RAM, went with the Patriot Viper Venom. It's a 32GB kit of DDR5 6200 CL40. It is a little bit on the slower side. There's a possibility of switching that out, but we are right at that budget cap. For our storage, we went with the Crucial P3 Plus 500GB M.2 SSD. For our graphics card, we went with the RX 6700 XT 12GB. And then our case is just some placeholder, Corsair 80 Plus bronze placeholder. I would like to switch this out for something of better quality, but we are kind of stricken there in that budget. And then for our monitor, we just picked some Acer 1440p 180Hz 24-inch monitor. The user didn't specify what they wanted, but given the graphics card and the CPU, it could probably push out to at least 1440p. Now, given this budget, there was no reason to build a DDR4 variant of this. We may have gotten slightly worse components for the same price and maybe a better graphics card, but this is the best build we could build out. Alright, let's move on to the next build. For build number 4, we have a budget of 1,150 USD. Wants a gaming type of system, no form factor preference, wants an AMD CPU and an AMD GPU, focusing first on that AMD GPU. No purchased or owned system components, no peripherals, and requests for RGB. Alright, so we can pretty much build an all-around balanced build for this one, especially with that 1150. So let's see what we can do for that. So for CPU, we went with the Ryzen 7 5800X T. It's an 8-core, 16-thread, 3.8 GHz boosting to 4.8. For a CPU cooler, they wanted something RGB, so we went with the Cooler Master 240mm ARGB liquid CPU cooler, just an AIO. For motherboard, we went with the Gigabyte B550M. It's a micro ATX AM4 motherboard. For our RAM, we went with the Corsair LPX 16GB kit of DDR4 3600 CL16. Nice P3 Crucial Plus 1TB, an RX 6700 XT, some placeholder Cooler Master case, and then that 750W bronze power supply. Now our power usage isn't too bad, which is why we're able to get away with that Corsair bronze. we do have a little bit of that budget left. We have about $130. At that point, I would actually switch out this power supply. And when I link it down in the description below, I'm probably going to change it out then, so you don't actually have to worry about that. That is this build. I did actually make a mid ATX version of this build. We'll check out in a second. The user didn't actually specify if they wanted any form factor preference. They just said they wanted some AMD CPU and an AMD GPU. And then here's the exact same build, except we went with the MSI Mag B550 Tomahawk and the DIY PC mid-tower case. Now, a lot of you are probably going to be asking down in the comment section why for this build I didn't do an AM5 build, and that is because the user wanted an AMD CPU that's good for gaming and an AMD GPU. And then for our final build on this episode, we have a budget of $1,200 USD. Once a gaming type of system, no form factor preference, an AMD CPU with no GPU preference, focusing first on that graphics card storage, and then our CPU with everything else after. No purchased or own system components, no peripheral, and a request of RGB. Alright, so this is a tad similar to our previous build, but let's see what we can do with an extra $50 this time around. If you spend $50 more than the previous one, we get the Ryzen 7 7700X. It's an 8-core, 16-thread, 4.5 GHz boost into 5.4. We have a Cooler Master 240mm AIO, an Asus TUF Gaming B650M micro ATX motherboard. For RAM, we get the 32GB kit of DDR5 6000 CL36, Crucial P3 Plus 1TB, an RX 6700 XT, and then the DIY PC mid-tower case and a 750W bronze power supply. Now, given promo codes and discounts, given promo codes and shipping, we are right under that budget. Now, if anybody just watched the previous build, I'm going to kind of question why we decided to do AM4 for the previous build and AM5 for this one. And that $50 actually helped us get that better CPU and shifted some of the budget around. So our RAM for AM4 was $44 versus AM5, which was $50. Our AM4 motherboard was $159, our AM5 motherboard was $139. Now I could probably get a less expensive motherboard on AM4, just current things are out of stock, it's not really a good time to build a PC out. Our CPU coolers are pretty much the same, and then our CPU was $169 for our AM4 and $271. Because we had another $50, we were able to just shift things around and do an AM5 build. So if the previous build user is seeing this and wants to spend $50 more, I would just get this build. Alright, now that we have all of our builds completed, I just wanted to check out bundle deals on Micro Center. It would have been better off for me to do this during each build section, but we'll change that for next time. Alright, so here on screen I have the budget of each build so we know what we have to work with. And I'm just going to do a quick trip to Micro Center and see what kind of builds we can change out. After our trip to Micro Center, for Request 1 with its $2,000 USD budget, we have 2 total builds. We're scrapping our AM4 build and going strictly AM5. If we want to go with AM5 brand new, everything's set through. Here's our same Ryzen 7 7700X that we saw earlier. It is a bit over the budget due to that graphics card, but as soon as graphics card prices fix themselves, then we'll be perfectly fine. But if we want to go with the Micro Center bundle deal, we get the Ryzen 9 9900X, 12 core, 24 threads. This is pretty much what you want to get. Cooling is going to be good enough, especially if you get this triple rad or the 280s. Kind of still fine. We get an X670E Tomahawk MSI Mag motherboard, and then we get a 32GB kit of CL30 DDR5 6000. Now, everything else pretty much stays the same, but I've read that people have had issues with this specific G-Skill set of RAM, and that you're actually better off getting something else like this Corsair Vengeance kit. If and only if you're actually able to swap out the RAM at Micro Center. I don't think you can. Maybe there's a policy stating if you have issues with components, you may be able to swap them out and pay a little bit more. But this is all, I guess, Micro Center dependent. I would get this kit of RAM instead, spend a little bit more money, as this will give you less of a headache. So these are 2 builds for our first request. So let's move on to request number 2. So unfortunately, after our trip to Micro Center, we weren't able to change anything out on this build. It is perfectly fine, maybe you can get another power supply, but that's it for now. And then just like our other builds, even after our trip to Micro Center, we still only have one build for this Intel build. And that is because everything on Micro Center was pretty much the same as we currently have here. There was no sense into upgrading, even if the CPU seemed like it was a better choice. The performance comparison between the two were pretty much identical. So this build is going to stay the same. Alright, for this build, we technically could get this Ryzen 7 9700X combo deal on Micro Center, but due to the fact that we still need to get a CPU cooler, we're kind of just going to keep the two builds we have for this one the same. Now this one's the one that we have both the Micro ATX and the standard ATX builds. So those two are pretty much going to stay the same. Even though we could technically upgrade it, we would still be in the needs of a CPU cooler. So I just wanted to bring this to the attention for build number 4. And then finally, build request 5 with its $1,200 budget, we have two builds. We have our original Ryzen 7 7700X build, and then that trip to Micro Center gave us a Ryzen 7 9700X, the MSI Mag X670E, and it seems like we're able to pick up a Corsair Vengeance RGB kit for $10 more. So I'll probably go back and switch it on that initial build, leaving us right over that budget of $10. But this is pretty much the build you would want to do for that $1,200 budget. Now, all of these will be linked in the description below. I know things were a little bit different this time around. The only real change is cutting down what I show on screen. For these Supercut videos, I won't be showing any long screen tests, just keeping them short, listing some trade-offs where I can, as well as where the user can upgrade. So if you like this episode of Budget Build's Monthly Supercut, you can show me your support by liking and subscribing, comment down below anything, and I will see you all in the next video.